Hey everyone. All right, it is 10 o'clock. Let us go ahead and get started. I'm sure people will be filtering in, but I do not want to waste 1 minute of your time. Okay, we are talking about GL PPM reconciliation report today. I'm hoping that you guys will bring some use cases that we can dive into. Things that you're seeing when you run the report that maybe you're not sure how to deal with or what you're looking at. I do have, as you can see, a few slides to show you just to talk concept behind the report. And then I'll do a demo, but as always, please feel free to interrupt me, come off mute or raise your hand and just ask your questions as we go along. I am in these workshops always telling you what to use this for and what not to use it for. This report is a very specific report. There's really only one thing to use it for, which is GL PPM reconciliation. Surprise, surprise. So use it to identify transactions that posted only to GL or only to PPM that requires some correction in order for balances to be accurate. So for example, if you're looking at sponsored project balances, you're looking at PPM data. If you have costs that are only sitting in the GL, they're not reflected as PPM costs, your balances are not going to be accurate. And you're going to need to take some corrective action to get those costs posted into PPM. And this report will help you identify those and tell you what you need to give the information that you need to make those corrections. Do not use this report to see all the transactions on a project. This report will not give you all of the transactions on the project. It will only give you amounts where there are issues. So and there are some things that it excludes because they're not things that you need to correct. I'm going to go into that a little bit later. But if you're trying to look at this and go, oh, these are all of this total amount of transactions that posted to my project, no, do not use it for that. You also can't use this to look at transactions on no project because transactions without a project segment do not post into PPM, so those are being excluded. We're not looking at those because we're comparing GL and PPM. Those only post in the GL by their nature. Okay, so a little bit about why there are variances. Why do we have things that post only into the GL or only into PPM? Why are these mistakes happening that we need to correct? This one hopefully is no longer happening because controls are in place with the purchasing system that prevent this from happening. But in our first year and a half, 2 years in Oracle, you could place an order in such a way that that invoice did not post into PPM and only posted into the general ledger. So if you didn't enter or the purchaser did not enter project accounting information with the project, task, funding source, etc., expenditure type, all of that data that's needed for something to post into PPM, it would only post into the general ledger. That is probably the biggest chunk of things that need to be fixed. And departments are primarily responsible for fixing that. The next biggest one that I've seen is related to ISIS charges from the student information system. So this is things like tuition and fees. ISIS charges post separately and simultaneously to GL and PPM. So they're not posting some charges from other systems like UCPath will post charges into PPM, and then those charges flow from PPM into the general ledger. ISIS doesn't do that, unfortunately. It's posting charges into the GL, and at the same time, it's posting those charges into PPM, and the charges that it posts into PPM are locked down to PPM. They don't flow up to the general ledger because that's happening separately. There are issues with this process. Our student information system it's still a legacy system. It has a lot of trouble we've found talking to Oracle. There's a lot of steps that those folks are taking to translate the information that's in this system into our chart of accounts in Oracle. And sometimes things will post to one chart string in the general ledger and to someplace different in PPM. Sometimes charges will post only to the general ledger and not to PPM. Sometimes transactions will post only to the PPM and not the general ledger. So there's quite a lot of issue here with differences between GL and PPM for those transactions coming out of the student information system. This is something that the central reconciliation team is just barely starting to look at addressing. Those issues are quite complex. There's been corrections and corrections of corrections, and they're a little bit difficult to follow. So that is something that they're starting to work on. A third area that's quite significant is coming out of the accounts receivable space. And as I'll note in just a minute, things like revenue, receivables, invoicing don't post into PPM just naturally. Those things in their normal course only post to the general ledger. But what we're talking about here is miscellaneous receipts that are actually refunds of expenses. So refunds of expenses, those expenses posted in PPM, the refunds of those expenses also should be posting into PPM. And there have been mistakes in how those were processed by that central office that led to those miscellaneous receipts only posting into the general ledger and not into PPM. This is something that the central reconciliation team is really heavy into correcting now. So they are in the process of working through all of those because those were errors on the part of the central office. Central offices are working on correcting those. And then there are things that just posted straight to the general ledger with journals. So journals only post to the general ledger. That's just how they always are. And if transactions are processed by journal, they're not posting into PPM. Does the report need special permissions per rule? You need to have access to run reports. That's basically all. If you can run other Cognos reports, you should be able to run this one.
Yes, I am able to run another Cognos report, but it's telling me the permission assigned to you may be limited.
Oh, it's a yellow triangle error, or sorry, warning. Yes, that you can just close out of that. That doesn't mean anything.
But it doesn't filter anything on one of the project. I was just looking at it while you were explaining. It says no data available. What does that mean?
That means there are no variances on your project.
Ah, okay, that helps. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, there are transactions that naturally only post to PPM or only post to GL. These transactions are excluded from the report. So there are things, it's like them only posting to PPM or only posting to GL is normal. There's nothing that you need to do about it. And so they do not show up on this report. Costs that only post to PPM, some examples are IFAS conversion costs. So on sponsored projects, costs that posted in IFAS in our legacy system, those were imported into Oracle on your sponsored projects. So that your sponsored project balances reflect accurately, because your sponsored project has your whole budget and then all of the costs that have posted against that budget, regardless of whether it was in Oracle or in the legacy system. So all of those costs are in PPM. But we don't want to account for them twice. They've already been accounted for in the old system, so we don't want to account for them again in the general ledger. So those are only in PPM. Unless there's a cost transfer of those costs, in which case there is a transfer of those costs in both PPM and in the GL. Indirect costs related to cost sharing, these are tracked only within PPM. They're not a true cost that's accounted for. So these three expenditure types that you can see here that are related to cost sharing, those you'll only see in PPM. They do not post in the GL. And they are excluded from this report. There are lots and lots of things that only post to the GL and are also being excluded from this report. So revenue doesn't post to the GL, or sorry, doesn't post to PPM. Receivables and payables don't post to PPM, only post to the GL. Some transfer account codes do post to PPM, some don't. Expense accruals only post to the GL, don't post to PPM, and you will not see them on the report. There is a complete list I'll show you on the report of what account codes post to PPM and which ones do not. And then this is my last slide. This just sums up what I said before. These are some things that the Central Reconciliation Team is working on correcting. These miscellaneous receipts that are actually refunds of expenses that only posted into the GL and should be in PPM, those ISIS source transactions. And then they're also working on these CBO assessments that only posted into the GL and really should also be in PPM. Okay. Let's get into the report. You can find this on the budget and finance section of BAH under financial accountability. You can run this by project manager, fund manager, financial unit, or project number. If you want to run for, an entire L4 financial unit, you can do that. And if you want to limit by project type, so for example, let's say you only want to look at sponsored projects, you can do that on here as well. I'm going to run this for my favorite department. On this accounting period filter, you can filter by accounting period, specific accounting periods. I don't recommend it. I recommend just leaving this alone. Sometimes you'll have, an issue that posted in one accounting period and it was corrected in a different accounting period. And if you're missing either half of that, then you're going to be seeing variances on the report that no longer exist. So I really don't recommend filtering by accounting period. This one is handy though, because you can have just timing differences in the current accounting period. So maybe something has posted to PPM today or yesterday, but it hasn't yet flowed through to the GL. that'll show up as a difference, but it's not a real difference. It's just something that, you're waiting for something to happen. So I typically run this for only closed accounting periods. That does mean that you won't pick up corrections that have happened in the current accounting period. But for me, it's typically better to not be seeing those differences that are just from timing issues. This confirm button is not running the report. This confirm button is just checking to make sure that you put something in here and you're not trying to run it with no filters. So once you hit that confirm button, you'll get this run button down here. And that is what runs the report. Okay. There is a link at the top here to this GL/PPM reconciliation page on Blink. This page has instructions on what to do when you find differences. We can walk through that a little bit. But I do recommend looking at this as you're going through and trying to figure out what do you do when you see things on here. If you see rows that net to zero, like this is pretty common where you'll see a difference on this equipment account code and then an opposite difference on this equipment clearing account code, you can just ignore those. Similarly here, like this total is this negative 2497, that's this row. So you get all of these other rows, these other three rows net to zero. So you can just ignore those. You don't need to do anything with those. And when this row is dealt with, this entire project will fall off of the report. This only shows you account codes, projects and account codes where there's a difference. So if the GL amount and the PPM amount are the same for a given account code, you won't see that on here. If there's no difference on the project, so that the total GL amount and the PPM amount are the same for the project as a whole, you will not see that project on here at all. So if you run this for one project, like Parul was just saying, and you get no data on this page, that means you don't have any variances on that project. If you run it for your financial unit and you see no data, that means there's no variances on any project for your financial unit. Congratulations. If that's the case, you should be very proud. I don't know if there's actually any financial unit that's in that situation. If you want to see what are the transactions behind any of these differences, you just click on this variance number and that will give you the transactions. So even on this tab, even if there's something, there's a lot of transactions in the GL and a lot in the PPM, and you just have a very small difference. If I click on that number, that will just give me that one transaction that is causing that variance. It's not going to give me all $69,000 of transactions that are in the GL and PPM. Just going to give me that 963 that's driving that difference. Yeah, Angie, let me answer your question in just a minute. I like this example because it's a little bit complicated. So I click on this 1742. I want to point out that there are multiple tabs across the bottom here, and different tabs have different transactions. It's really important that you look at all of the tabs before you start diving into like thinking that you need to correct something. So for example, I see two transactions on this payables invoices tab. I see these transactions on this payables payments tab, and I notice that this 305 total is actually the opposite of this 305 here that I did not click on. So that tells me I can actually ignore this row and I can ignore these transactions. They net to zero. I'm not going to pay any attention to those. This projects tab also has some stuff on it. And I noticed that this total of $34 offsets this variance of negative $34. So even though they're on different tabs, I know that I can ignore those two lines, this line and this, both of these transactions net to zero with each other. I'm not going to pay any attention to those. Nothing here. This is zero, so that's not anything I need to pay attention to. So out of all of this stuff in here, by looking at all of them at once, I can tell that the only thing that I actually need to address in here is this $14.37 on this one invoice. I can ignore everything else.
Could you do that slower? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Actually, yeah.
Right. So on this project, I have this $1,742 difference on lab supplies and a negative $3 on this purchase discount credits. If I click on the 1742, I get these details and I have stuff on a bunch of different tabs. Actually, 4 out of the 5 tabs have stuff on them. So do I need to address all of these things or just some? If I look at this payables payments tab, I notice this 305, same amount as this 305, but opposite sign. Those two net to zero, right? So I'm going to ignore everything on this tab and I'm going to ignore this row, right? Those net to zero. And once this project is dealt with, I won't be able to see that anymore. In addition, on this projects tab, I see this $34 difference. And I also see a negative $34 here on this invoice. That negative 34 nets to zero with this positive 34. And I'm going to ignore all of that. I should be able to see. Yeah, here's the invoice number 275712R. That's also that invoice number here. So it's not that there's a difference between GL and PPM on these. There's an invoice here. This invoice is showing up. The PPM amount is showing up on this tab. And the GL amount, or actually there's an adjustment here. Sorry, it's not a GL amount. There's an adjustment to PPM that's showing up on this projects tab. And those net out with each other. So there's no issue here. There's a negative amount in PPM and a positive amount in PPM, and those net to zero.
Heather, so I understand what you're doing and going through that process, but is there a reason why the report can't go through and run that logic and not even show us this information we don't need to pay attention to?
Yeah, no, sorry, Becky. The reason this is pulling over to this projects tab is because there's this adjusted transaction number. So this is, you don't follow, this is getting really into the weeds, so no worries if you don't follow, but there's this adjusted transaction number, which is typically from cost transfers, and cost transfers always have a project source. That's why they're getting pulled into this tab. This has a payables source, this line, so that they have different sources, and that's how the report is lining things up. And because they have different sources, the report's unable to say these go together.
Could there be like another tab that just is separate sources and you just know you can ignore that whole tab? I'm just thinking something that would be less step driven for the people who have to clean up this whole mess, which is, the departments for the most part. Just trying to look at eliminating some steps in this cleanup.
You can also go, this variance is 1437. And I see that 1437 right here. So if I fix this 1437 variance, this whole project is going to fall off of the report.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me just show you one more. I think this is an example of what I'm looking for. This was a travel account code that I clicked on, but it's a negative amount in the variance. Nothing there, nothing there. Oh. Interesting. Okay, that's not a as clean of an example as I was looking for. Let me try this one. Okay, so none of these other tabs had anything on them, just this other tab shows me this negative 2497, and notice that these are miscellaneous receipts. So those are, like I mentioned before, those are refunds of expenses that were processed through the accounts receivables office and only posted to the GL. They did not post into PPM. So this would be a ticket into accounts receivable to fix this so that those transactions post also to PPM. I'm going to go back to this one.
Can you add some, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you add some instructions and say, for example, whatever you just showed us that there was that little misalignment. Can you, at the bottom of the report, say submit a ticket?
The instructions are on blank, Angie, and that is linked from the top of the page. So the instructions are not on the page. That would take up a lot of space. But you just go into this blank page and there's this section called "What do I do when I find differences?" And that has all of the instructions for what to do.
And I admit to being dumb and lazy and saying that I'm not going to know to go to this blank page. Is there really no way to just put
It's
it
right
there?
at the top of the report, Angie. Just click on that and that takes you to the blank page. Okay, so this has instructions on what to do when you find differences. This payables invoices one, so when you see these transactions on, let me get rid of these couple of things. Like when you see these transactions on payables invoices that you need to correct. These, if you have these, I would really recommend focusing in on these variances because these are things that really only you as fund managers can correct. There are instructions on here. This has a link to the ticket that you need to submit these through, as well as the spreadsheet that you need to complete to link into that ticket. So if you have one of these, just download this into Excel. And then this has everything that you need to populate this spreadsheet for processing the correction. So I can take this invoice number and supplier straight off of here. And paste it into here. This PO number is optional, so you don't need to complete that. All of this chart string information is in the same order. Let's see, project through project, right? So I can just paste that in there. It's only, we're going to leave that task number blank. This is the from section. I'm going to copy and paste that chart string over here in the to section. I don't know what task this is going to go on, but I have to decide as you know, manager of this project, what task number that should go on. Let's say it's going to be 1. For this expenditure type, this is going to be the same as the account code, but you're going to want to look up what this, what the expenditure type should be. To do that, you can go to the project information panorama. This has an expenditure type list on it. And so I had 522401. 522401 has 3 different expenditure types associated with it. So I just want to pick what's applicable to me. I'll just copy it straight off of there. And put it in here. This date, I can take straight off of the report. There's this transaction date here, and this date is in the format that it should be for this. Oh, sorry, there's no expenditure date there. If there's a funding source number for a sponsored project, then I'm going to need to fill that in. I'm not necessarily going to know that if it only posted into the GL. And then I'll put the amount from that difference in here. If you have a lot of these, you could have hundreds of these from one list. You can copy and paste all of them at once into this sheet. So it's really, it doesn't need to be row by row, line by line. You know, you can take out all of, sorry. No, I could copy my invoice number and supplier from everything on down all at once into this report at once, copy the whole chart string, and paste that all together at once. Okay. Where you see these differences on undergrad tuition and fees, let me click on one of these. All I'm going to say on this is that these can be quite complex to dive into. So you can see my difference was just $5,000 on this. But there's all of this stuff that is different between GL and PPM. And some of it was corrected with just journals. that posted into the GL that are, not really tied in any way to these ISIS source transactions. So it can really take some back and forth to figure out what is the actual $5,000 that is needs to be corrected. This gives you a summary by PID, GL amount for that PID and PPM amount for that PID. But this in particular can be really labor intensive, which is why that central reconciliation team is starting to dive in on doing this analysis for departments. I think, if you wanted to submit a ticket, you could just download this whole thing with the project data and the ISIS data and submit that in a ticket to Student Financial Solutions to help correct. Are there any SWAT
Heather,
team?
Oh, sorry. Heather.
Yeah, Angie asked if departments can ask a SWAT team to help with this. Are there any SWAT team representatives here? Academic Affairs Tiger team is starting to help academic affairs departments with specifically the invoice related discrepancies where you need to fill out this form to process those corrections. We're starting to work on those for departments, but I can't really speak to what SWAT team is doing. Becky, what were you going to say?
What other corrections is the central reconciliation team working on? So when I start looking at my venue, because I see, when I run my venue, I see 24 grand in variances that I need to now. And just watching how you troubleshoot, this is like hours of work. What other ones are they working on that I can potentially just kind of put on the back burner for now?
This is the list here. So
Okay.
those miscellaneous receipts that are refunds of expenses, the ISIS source things, so tuition and fees,
Okay.
and those CBO assessments that are come across as campus administrative debit. So like some down here, like this. You see this 2416 on campus administrative debit. That's something they're working on.
Okay, cool.
So they're working on that one, and then where I have one that says ISIS interface, and then if I start clicking through it, it looks different, but ISIS interface, is that the other one they may be working on? They were the ones I was going to ask about.
You want to share, or Becky, do you want to share what you're looking at?
Either. Oh. Here, I'll share mine. I have both. I just ran QI. Let's see. Wrong screen. Okay, share screen. All right. There's a reconciliation. Actually, I was looking for a simple one. There's the simple one, the ISIS one. Where's the green circle? Is it showing up?
Yeah.
All right. There's this green circle. Okay, there's ISIS interface. And that's cool. It's only on the general ledger. We've got a refund from something called ISIS interface. And then if I go through.
That's not an account code I've seen before, Karen.
I don't know yet. If I look at ISIS, it doesn't give me anything. But if I look at projects, it does. And it was definitely a refund that came wandering in here. Refund there. It didn't go through the PPM, so that's simple enough. I wouldn't know what to do with it, but I can look it up.
So that SLA event line description, that is showing you that transaction came from PPM, and that's showing you where it came from. But look at the project number in there. It came from project 1032512.
Oh.
And it's posted in the GL to something completely different.
SLA meaning subledger accounting event, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, general ledger from the subledger, event happened with a line description this. Well, good.
Yeah, so you see that expenditure business unit UCSD campus, okay.
Uh-huh.
Project number 1032512.
Uh-huh.
task 2 is where it came from in PPM. But look where it's sitting in the GL. See the project code? The third column?
Oh. All right.
Yeah, so I would
Yes.
just, I would
Different
download
one.
this and I would submit it in a ticket to the PPM team.
Okay, and then. All right, well, that is strange then. Okay, so that one, just put in a ticket and submit. That's one that I know it won't fit. It wasn't PPS didn't put it on there, so the little form doesn't make it go backwards. Got that figured out finally. And then these ones here, we have a lot of the campus administrative debit ones. And those are just they're working on those, huh?
Right.
Just let them continue to work on them. Okay, because we don't know what they are. It's just how to do with them. That was a question. The rest of this is all pretty small stuff that we can clear up. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Thank you.
Becky, do you have anything you want to share?
What about when you see IDC?
Mm.
Like, I have a little IDC discrepancy, it looks like, of like $69.
Mm.
But you know
Oh.
what, I think that one might have had cost share, maybe that has something to do with it. No, I mean, most of them I'm seeing are, you know, office supplies, lab supplies, but there was like an IDC, I have equipment stuff that I can ignore because it's that whole comes in on one account, clears out on another account.
Mhm.